Welcome to another episode of the Libertarian Christian Podcast, a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute. If you are not watching on YouTube, you should be, and you can go over to our YouTube channel and subscribe to us, because this is actually one that you're going to want to kind of watch, although I guess maybe it's okay to listen to, because it's we're going to discuss two guys debating something, and then we're going to discuss those things. And so Norman's here with me. Hey, Norman.
Hey, Doug.
Back in the last decade, almost
a
decade ago, in the ancient time, the BC, before COVID times, and the before LCI times, when it was just libertarianchristians.com, you did a debate with Allan Carlson in 2013. So this is before LCI was established as a nonprofit, but you were still operating on behalf of libertarianchristians.com, and you debated whether or not the government should define marriage as between one man and one woman. With this guy, Allan Carlson. And where was it again?
So this happened, like you said, in 2013 at Patrick Henry College. This was a kind of unusual incident to begin with, because it's not like I get regularly invited to do debates all over the world or something like that. Or even to I don't get a whole lot of speaking engagements or whatever. I mean, that's fine. I go on podcasts and whatnot. But this was pretty different, because we want you to come to this college in, outside of Washington, D.C., in Arlington, not even Arlington, Virginia. I forget. It's outside of Arlington, Virginia, where Patrick Henry College is a small Christian school, actually populated by a lot of homeschoolers who go and attend there. And the Wilberforce Society president, this guy named Chris Hamilton, invited me out of nowhere, basically, and because he felt like it would be an interesting debate topic, and that is like the resolution of that should the government define marriage as between one man and one woman. And so this was really interesting because the debate partner was a gentleman who, I came to know a little bit through his own work as I did my own research and homework on him, and named Allan Carlson. And Dr. Carlson is the president of the Howard Center for Family Law and Public Policy, I think is what the full name is. And I'm assuming he's still there. I haven't looked him up recently. I have a lot of respect for his work. I think he's done some really interesting things, and you'll see in the debate that I think you'll catch on to where I went with my argument and whatnot.
So why are you and I on screen here if all we're going to do is replay a debate? Actually, that's not all we're going to do, right?
Yeah. So we're going to play this debate for you guys, but then we're also going to commentate. And so there may be some kind of interjections in the middle. We may pause and have some discussion.
Some amens.
Some amens. Yeah. Maybe some boos. I'll
maybe
boo myself a few times.
End.
Yeah, exactly. But hopefully provide some additional context as to, maybe even like some of the things I was thinking and why I approached it in certain ways. We'll see what I remember and what I don't.
Yeah, right. Well, without further ado, we will hit share on the screen here and actually get this rolling. There is an update, there is an introduction to it that is given by Patrick Henry College. I think the audio is clipped just a tiny bit right at the beginning, but it's not, it's pretty trivial. So anyway, here we go.
Society in regards to morality, and we are committed to defending the moral character of society through both law and culture. So we hope that you enjoy, learn something from tonight, and get some new ideas
guy
on how to engage
down
in the
there,
discussion
I
in
think
a constructive and
may be wrong,
substantive fashion. With that, I want to introduce our moderator for tonight, Dr. Mitchell. He, as most of you know, is the chairman of the Department of Government and one of our much-loved political theory professors at Patrick
I think it's
Henry
really
College.
helpful that they introduce who you are, because, you look quite different, sir.
Oh my gosh,
I also want to say that if you want to get involved with the Wilberforce Society and you have any questions, you can talk to me or to Chris Hamilton right over there.
Oh, never mind. So I was not Chris Hamilton.
And we'd be happy to tell you what our plans are for the next semester and tell you how to get involved.
Stage left.
Also, if you're watching this on the webcast, if you have any questions,
did this live.
You can email
they broadcast
at
this live.
wilberforcesociety.org, and we'll definitely get back to you. And
I'll note, by the way, this took a while to figure out where this footage went.
I want to turn it over to Dr. Mitchell to introduce our debaters.
We had to search around for a while. So Dr. Mitchell here is cool. I got to have dinner with him. He's a nice guy. I like him a lot.
Well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. And this is promising to be a stimulating discussion. First, I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then I will introduce the format of this event.
Like my burnt orange shirt for UC Austin.
Left, I guess your far right is Dr. Norman Horn. Dr. Horn holds a PhD in chemical engineering from the University of Texas at Austin and a Master's of Arts in Theological Studies.
Yeah, this was 2013, so I had finished my PhD by this point.
He's won awards for his writing, and both in engineering and theology, which is quite a feat, and not too many people can claim such a span, I think. He's authored a variety of articles in science, economics, political theory, and he's been published in a variety of venues, including Young American Revolution, Students for Liberty, LewRockwell.com, the Washington Post. He is the founder and editor of a website called libertarianchristians.com. I encourage you to check it out. I was there this afternoon. And it's a website dedicated to exploring libertarian theory from a Christian point of view. Next, we have Dr. Allan Carlson.
Nice to know that he's a reader.
Carlson is the president of the Howard Center for Family, Religion, and Society in Rockford, Illinois.
Family, Religion,
founder
Society.
Of the international founder and international secretary of the World Congress of Families, and you holds a worldwide event every 2 years. Is that correct?
Which is pretty cool.
He's the editor of The Family in America, a journal of public policy, which I would encourage you all to check out. He holds a PhD in modern European history from Ohio University, and he's taught in a variety of colleges, including Gettysburg College, Hillsdale College, and John Paul II Institute on Marriage and Family of the Catholic University of America. In 1988,
so this guy's resume is way bigger
Ronald Reagan
than mine.
Appointed him to the National Commission on Children, on which he served until 1993. He's the author of 12 books, several of the titles: Family Questions, Reflections on the American Social Crisis, The American Way, Family and Community in the Shaping of the American Identity, Conjugal America, on the Public Purposes of Marriage, and the forthcoming, The Natural Family,
right?
Where It Belongs, New Librarian Essays. And I've had the opportunity to read an advanced copy, and it's going to be
a little creepy,
well worth reading. So I encourage you to look for that when it comes out. He's been a commentator on a variety of television programs: ABC, CBS, NBC, PBS, MSNBC, and so on. And he also serves as senior editor for Touchstone, Journal of Mere Christianity, another journal that you really should know about if you have not heard of it. So check it out. It's in our library. So much for introductions. Now, tonight, the resolution that is going to be debated, resolved, that government should define marriage as between one man and one woman. I suspect that I think that the crux of this is going to be the government. That is, who should be making these calls? What role should the government play in defining marriage, in enforcing marriage? And I think we're going to be in for a stimulating discussion. Here's the format. Dr. Carlson will open with 15 minutes in defense of the resolution. Dr. Horn will reply with 15 minutes. And then Dr. Carlson will have a 5-minute rebuttal, followed by a 6-minute rebuttal from Dr. Horn, followed by a 1-minute rebuttal by Dr. Carlson. All right, that'll give us 45 minutes or so. And then there's going to be 25 or 30 minutes for your questions. So as they are discussing, I hope that you are formulating questions and getting those ready to go, because there's going to be a good chance for interaction with our speakers after they speak. So with no further discussion, let us begin. Dr. Carlson, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you. In my opening remarks, I will focus on 3 points. First, biblical revelation versus evolutionary science on the matter of marriage. Second, the distinctive Christian understanding of marriage. And third, the secular reasons why the state must be involved in defining and defending true marriage. Modern debates about marriage and family frequently pit the partisans of biblical revelation against the advocates of science and evolution. Contemporary advocates of same-sex marriage have adopted this tactic, arguing that marriage evolves to meet new ends and new means and new needs, while religious folk remain bogged down in old biblical passages no longer relevant. As I see it, the story of Scripture and science's evolutionary narrative actually wind up in surprising agreement over the origin and nature of the human creature, with true marriage being the key variable. People of biblical faith, Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, find the origins of the family chronicled in Genesis 1 and 2. Here, God establishes marriage as an unchanging aspect of his creation, essential to the divine order on earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it." Therefore, a man leaves his father and mother and cleaves to his wife, and they become one flesh. These passages affirm marriage as both sexual, be fruitful and multiply, and economic, the phrase regarding fill the earth and subdue it. What does science teach? Well, the founders of modern anthropology also held that marriage is an unchanging institution, universal in its basic elements, common to all humanity. As Edward Westermarck explained a century ago, among the lowest savages, as well as the most civilized races of men, we find the family consisting of parents and children and the father as its protector. Marriage bound this family system together, uniting a regulated sexual relation with economic obligations. Certainly, there have been differences in the marriage systems of distinct human cultures. However, the fundamental marriage bond has not changed and does not change. As a later anthropologist, George Murdoch, wrote in his great 1949 survey of human cultures, the nuclear family is a universal human social grouping. He added, all known human societies have developed specialization and cooperation between the sexes, roughly along this biologically determined line of cleavage. Contemporary evolutionary scientists agree. In an important meta-analysis for the American journal Science, paleoanthropologist C. Owen Lovejoy argues that the unique sexual and reproductive behavior of man, not growth of the brain or cortex, this may be the key to human origin. The evolutionary narrative, he says, indicates that the pairing off of male and female hominids, early men, into something very much like married couples, actually reaches back 3 to 4 million years. As Lovejoy concludes, both advances in the material culture and the Pleistocene acceleration in brain development came after an already established hominid character system, which included intensified parenting and social relationships, monogamous pair bonding, and specialized sexual reproductive behavior. This implies that the nuclear family and human sexual behavior may have their ultimate origin long before the dawn of the Pleistocene. In short, the invention of marriage and social fatherhood, where men take responsibility for their offspring, these were the vital steps in human evolution. Now, certainly they remain differences on timing. Nonetheless, the biblical narrative and the scientific record agree on this. From our very origin as unique creatures on earth, we humans have been defined by heterosexual monogamy, involving marriage and social fatherhood, and by the special linkage of the reproductive and the economic, a linkage in which two become one flesh. According to the scientists, the evolution of marriage did occur, but only once. At the beginning, when to be human also came to mean to be marital. Other cultural variations surrounding marriage are simply details. Any change is the mark of cultural strengthening or weakening around a constant human model. Accordingly, when governments restrict the privileges and burdens of marriage to heterosexual couples, they do so in obedience to both biblical revelation and to science. My second point. The fathers of the early Christian church were clear on a key matter. First purpose of marriage is procreation. As John Chrysostom explained in the mid-4th century, there are two reasons why marriage was instituted: that we may live chastely and that we may become parents. Christians also insisted on monogamy, one woman married to one man for life. In the year 400 AD, Augustine, Bishop of Hippo, wrote the book On the Goods of Marriage. He argued that God desired man's perpetuation through marriage. Offspring, he insisted, were an obvious good of marriage, the other two being fidelity and sacramental union. As Augustine elaborated, what food is to the health of man, intercourse is to the health of the human race. And each is not without its carnal delight, which cannot be lust if, modified and restrained by temperance, is brought to a natural use, procreation. Augustine also insisted that the act of procreation included the receiving of children lovingly, the nourishing of them humanely, the educating of them religiously. The Protestants of the 16th century introduced no change on most of these matters. As the reformer Martin Luther wrote in 1521, God's words in Genesis 1:28, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth," represented more than a blessing, even more than a command. They were rather a divine ordinance, which it is not our prerogative to hinder or ignore. The Geneva-based reformer John Calvin put even greater emphasis on Genesis 1:28. He argued that these words represented the only command of God made before the fall that was still active after God drove Adam and Eve out of Eden. This gave this phrase a unique power and importance. Calvin added that this pure and lawful method of increase, which God ordained from the beginning, remains firm. This is that law of nature which common sense declares to be inviolable. Luther drove home the same point. We were all created to do as our parents have done, to beget and rear children. This is a duty which God has laid upon us, commanded, and implanted in us, as is proved by our bodily members, our daily emotions, and the example of all mankind. Indeed, this last point, the example of all mankind, explains why Luther abandoned the Roman Catholic understanding of marriage as a sacrament. Simply put, he noted that marriage was not unique to Christianity. Rather, it was universal, found among Jews, Muslims, pagans, and Christians alike. All the same, the reformers uniformly insisted that rulers, that is, heads of government, had a moral duty to recognize and protect this vital human institution from those who would do it harm. My third point. Grievous challenges to the institution of marriage are indeed nothing new. The Soviet Bolsheviks waged war on marriage and home for the first 2 decades of the Russian Revolution. A century and a quarter earlier, the Jacobins of the French Revolution also sought to tear down marriage laws resting on inherited principles. The proposed French Civil Code of 1801, for example, promised freedom to marry and easy divorce. Ignoring both Christian thought and the evidence of all history, the radical authors of this measure argued that, quote, what marriage itself is was previously unknown. And it is only in recent times that men have acquired precise ideas on marriage, unquote. Building on the thought of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the architects of the 1801 Code urged that marriage be made natural, by which they meant animalistic, subject to the ebb and flow of the passions. Marriage as such should be easy to enter, easy to leave. Louis de Bonald, spelled B-O-N-A-L-D, a statesman and a founder of modern social science, rose in defense of traditional marriage. His 1801 book, titled in English translation On Divorce, remains a valuable resource in helping sort out issues regarding marriage. Bonald's first task was to clarify that marriage in itself and at bottom has always been a civil, religious, and physical act at once. Marriage attracted the attention of civil legislators, in Bonald's view, because it was the founding act of domestic society, whose interests should be guaranteed by civil authority. But this domestic society did not really rest on the needs or desires of the spouses. The end of marriage, he wrote, is not the happiness of the spouses. If by happiness one understands an idyllic pleasure of the heart and senses. Rather, and this is key, the end or purpose of marriage is the reproduction and above all, the conservation of man. Since this conservation cannot in general take place outside of marriage or without marriage. Now, by conservation, Bonald meant the proper care, rearing, education, and protection of children, which he believed could be best achieved in the married couple home. If sexual pleasure or happiness was the goal of marriage, he said, then the civil authority had no business being involved. Instead, Bonald wrote, political power only intervenes in the spouse's contract of union because it represents the unborn child, which is the sole object of marriage, and because it accepts the commitment made by the spouses in its presence and under its guarantee to bring that child into being. In effect, a marriage is truly a contract, in his words, between three persons, two of whom are present, one of whom the potential child is absent, but is represented by public power, guarantor of the commitment made by the two spouses to form a society. Bonald also explained why the marriage of a man and a woman who proved infertile or unable to create a child remained valid. Many of the French Revolution's philosophers worried about the size of the French population and called for easy divorce in cases of failed fertility, so that new pairings of men and women might be tried to produce the children that would be needed for war later on. Bonald replied, whatever importance may be attached to population by these great depopulators of the universe, they would doubtless not dare to maintain that in human marriages, one should, as on stud farms, proceed by trial. In short, governments should not be in the business of fertility tests. Rather, it should be understood, or rather, government should understand the potential fertility of all male-female bonds, by implication, including even modern ones via the Petri dish, and the powerful positive effects on children of the complementarity of man and woman. The state then holds together the potential or actual parents for the sake of good conservation of the potential or actual children. Bonald's argument underscores the central matter here. The real issue at play is not marriage per se. It is responsible procreation. All healthy human societies have a deep primal interest in ensuring that children are born and that they grow up in stable two-parent male-female homes. Thousands upon thousands of social science research projects do affirm that it is in these households, that children have the best prospects to grow into healthy, happy, intelligent, and independent citizens. This is what true marriage is all about, and this is why the state is involved. If current efforts to deconstruct marriage succeed, we face only two real options. Either we'll have to recreate this same bundle of privileges, burdens, and incentives under another label, or we will accelerate our current path towards social ruin and public bankruptcy. Thank you.
Okay, so lots of stuff that could be talked about here. And I know that my opening statement is going to not exactly address all these points, but I think a couple of things that I would note from the outset here is that like a lot of this stuff that he's saying, like I agree with, which is kind of funny. I mean, other than the state involvement portion, it's like, well, for this reason, the state should be involved. It's interesting because I think that if I recall right, I don't exactly attack it in this way, but in no manner does his argument justify the use of aggression to get what he wants, which I think is something I probably don't get into that as well as I probably should have and could have. But there's some really interesting things he says here that governments shouldn't be in the business. This whole thing about that the primary purpose being procreation, but the government shouldn't be in the business of fertility is like, that's walking a really tenuous line already. Mm-hmm. Like, it's like, how are you going to do this? What is it there for otherwise? And it's just interesting that he's going to, that his manner of trying to argue for this, I think, is like it's walking a really fine line. And it kind of begs the question a little bit like, well, if it's not supposed to do this and its purpose is this, then what is it there for? And so I don't think I really attacked it on that front as well as I probably could have. I do think it's also funny that he talks about, to be human is to be marital, and that when the government then protects marriage in certain ways, it's doing it both in obedience to biblical law and obedience to science. What does that sound like? Hey, is that following the science? Whoa.
I see. Yeah.
I think it's kind of a little funny considering our current, milieu of intellectual discussion in the modern day, shall we say, 10 years later.
Well, one thing I find interesting that he's at Patrick Henry College, which, okay, I don't know a whole lot. Actually, I don't know anything about Patrick Henry College, but my guess is these are not a bunch of kids sitting there that are conducive to evolution and to evolutionary biology. But for some reason, for the record, he wanted to make that part of his argument.
Well, that's actually
which is a smart move.
Yeah, because he's sort of saying like, no matter which angle you come at, this is where you end up. And I don't think he's necessarily wrong on that. Like, I think, and you'll definitely hear me say here, I'm 100% certain that in this opening statement, I talk a little bit about like this. There are some great things that Dr. Carlson has to say about things like, no fault divorce and the purpose of marriage and so on and so forth. Like, I think he's got a lot of good things to say there. He's a very respectable person. So I get that. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where it goes at that point. Anything else you want to add there, Doug?
No, and apparently my webcam kind of went weird on me here, so I don't know what's going on. Nope, it's not you at all. I don't know what's going on.
Well,
so we'll see here.
Our viewers will just get me then. What do you know? While he's trying to get his image back, I will note that, look at this, right? So there you are.
Different image. Yeah. I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah. Well, it's just side note in time. This was, like I said, at the end of this was in either October or November 2013. And at this point in time, I was definitely not bearded. And part of the reason for that was actually that when I was living in Austin, my grandmother was still alive and she hated beards. And then she passed away at the end of 2013. And after that is when I started growing it. And then I just kept it ever since, I guess. Just, looks all right. But it does demonstrate just how gray you can get from your own children. As you can tell, I'm far more stressed out than Doug is. So.
Wait, what? Oh, but the gray hair. Yeah. Well, I'm wearing a hat for a reason. So
yeah, exactly.
It can go both ways, I suppose.
I mean, you can tell I'm also 10 years older, based purely on receding hairline.
Oh, Yeah. Well, we'll have to take this conversation offline here. So what I really want to know is, what does 2013 Dr. Norman Horn say in response to this?
Oh, well, here we go.
and I also, even more importantly, what I want to hear is, what does today's Norman say about previous Norman? Anyway, I think y'all get what I'm going for.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, I want to say a few words of thanks here. I just want to thank Patrick Henry College, of course, for hosting the debate.
Listen to that young voice.
You guys have been awesome.
It's so
Thank
sultry.
you for organizing this, and especially to Chris Hamilton for really making this happen. I'd also like to thank Dr. Carlson for being here. It's been a real pleasure reading what he's had to say on his website, and I highly suggest you check it out. I think you will definitely learn a few things. Now, as I begin, I want to first off say that I'm not speaking as a spokesperson for the Libertarian Party, although I do believe my views are compatible with their goals. I'm speaking as what we might call a small L libertarian.
I'm going to pause for just a second, and I just to note that this is just so common for people like you and me to make sure that when people hear us speak as libertarians, we're speaking as libertarians as a philosophy, not as a party. Which
I'm pretty sure
both sad and kind of funny.
I'm pretty sure, though, that even at this point, like, I think either Dr. Mitchell or Chris suggested that I do this very thing. As a
okay.
Because I'm fairly certain that happened. Although I'm, for the record, that is a vague memory. So
one who and to briefly define libertarianism as Dr. Mitchell asked me to do. In short. We believe that the initiation of force is unjustified, whether by individuals or by a group of individuals, for instance, by government, in order to accomplish some sort of goal. Now, for me, I'm speaking as well as a Christian libertarian who considers that this philosophy of liberty is a natural outgrowth of a Christian worldview. And therefore, I hold many of the same ideas that Dr. Carlson has regarding the origin of marriage from a biblical and theological point of view. But my goal here is not just to defend the negative of the resolution, that is, that the government should not be the one to define marriage at all, but to argue why the state shouldn't involve itself in marriage at all. I want to present also a positive case for what we can do as Christians to promote freedom for all and to build up families and the church. So I will focus on 3 points.
Seems all right.
The first point here is that definition from the state of to define marriage is actually unnecessary. As Dr. Carlson even said, marriage predates the nation state. Well, it also predates countries. It predates cities, towns, all sorts of government bodies and judicial systems. It predates even the church. Genesis 1's definition was written at least about 1,200 years before the birth of Christ, depending on how you want to date it. And whether timing is an issue there is immaterial. We know even further, however, that marriage predates even that. It doesn't need government protection or regulation. Marriage is a private institution and I would say a Christian sacrament, but it does have a public component. But it's also not the other way around. It's primarily private. It's primarily Christian to us, especially as Christians. Now, that public component, as unromantic as it may seem, is really just the recognition of a consensual contract. And that contract may even be understood to be judged in the form of arbitration if there is a problem. And even then, if the arbiter is selected by those consensual individuals to be something non-state, such as the church, for instance, you realize that the state is completely unnecessary there as well. The state has no business regulating private institutions. If you believe in limited to zero government, there's no reason to empower the government, for instance, with regulating, say, private business. Meddling in that sphere leads to trouble and to tyranny in the economic sphere. So how much more so should we be concerned with the government meddling in cultural institutions such as marriage? We don't think government should regulate churches. We think that's absurd. How much more so should we be concerned about an institution fundamental to the propagation of mankind itself? The government doesn't need to be there. Second, defining and regulating marriage, especially in our American sense, is not constitutional. Even on the federal government's own terms, it has no authority with which to regulate marriage. Just like it has no authority to force a healthcare system upon us, or to provide social security, or to create a welfare state, to grope me or my family in airports like they did this morning, or wage war without congressional declaration, or wage a war on drugs.
Dude, I don't know if you have any one-liners later, but that might just be the most memorable thing I'll take away from this.
That was prior to me getting TSA pre. So
yeah, I don't even know. Did that exist in 2013?
I think keep in mind, this was only a year, less than a year, I think, after our battles with the TSA in Texas.
Right. Yeah.
Long story. Goodness. We won't get into that now. But at that point in my life, I didn't have TSA pre, and I was flying around various places anyway, and it was annoying.
That's funny. Good one, man.
They don't have the authority to do any of those things. It's not constitutional. So granting the feds this sort of power is really an affront to the American founders' sort of vision. In fact, really, the Constitution even only mentions culture a few times at best, and you kind of have to make a stretch. You might say, well, it's mention of patents and copyright, maybe one, maybe of women voting, of prohibition of child labor, or maybe about prohibition itself, and we know how that turned out. We should oppose all sorts of constitutional measures, including the ones we don't personally like.
Meant extra
Defining
constitutional
and regulating
measures.
marriage is unconstitutional. It doesn't need to be done. It's not within the power of the federal government to do. But you might ask, well, what about doing this in the form of other smaller states or local government's power? Well, I would also argue then that the power to define and regulate marriage is not a power any government should have at all. Government's purpose, if it has a purpose at all, ought to only be the protection of individual rights in person and property, not the handling of an economy or deciding what you and I are going to do with our lives, and not setting the course of culture. Culture is a resilient entity in and of itself. It doesn't need to have government trying to meddle and direct it. Now, instead of allowing culture to thrive,
the solution to the culture war,
letting the church handle these sorts of things, we instead get a massive legal apparatus surrounding marriage and family issues. And this confuses us to no end. And it starts even much earlier than what we have here today with arguments about in the public square about same-sex marriage. Did you know that even it was in the 17th century that America had anti-miscegenation laws, that you could be legally prosecuted for having a relationship or a marriage with someone who of a different race? This is what happens when you allow the government to define what marriage is. It not only becomes monopolized in the legal system, it then, after it monopolizes the legal system before us, it also purports to dictate how you're going to arrange your consensual contracts in this regard. At present, the American system creates a special class of the married versus the unmarried. And the legal system that surrounds that creates so much confusion that almost none of us, married people included, really know how anything works. It promotes irresponsibility and reduces our liberty as a result. Irresponsibility in how we enter into relationships, irresponsibility in how we exit them. Instead of placing these sorts of responsibilities in the realm of the church and in the realms of agreed upon contracts, we let the state handle whatever we want.
Pause. That's so... kudos past Norm for hitting that point hard, because that was that's so apropos here. In that, we talk a lot about that liberty does require responsibility. I mean, it doesn't responsibility, and it doesn't matter like where you go in like the liberty movement these days. That's something that you're going to hear, whether it's the LCI as small L libertarians or even big L libertarians in the LP. This is talked about. And so it's just interesting that when you start correlating this aspect of the more power that you cede into the state, it breeding irresponsibility, liberty goes away. Anyway, I just thought and just hitting that in a couple different notes right there was just like, it's some nice wordsmithing there, past Norm. Yeah, not bad.
Incidentally, Dr. Carlson has actually written about some of these similar topics, especially in his writings on no-fault divorce.
I remember this.
I found that very enlightening. When you consider that at present, I believe he quotes, I can't remember the person, but he says, it's interesting that in the modern courtroom, in the divorce courtroom, the only person who is considered guilty until proven innocent is the defendant of a no-fault divorce.
Yeah.
So we see a distortion of law itself when the state gets involved. And these things are not only promoting that irresponsibility in handling marriage, it reduces our liberty as a result. Government handling of marriage removes Christian marriage from the church, or at least it deceives us. Because how many of us really don't think about how many of us think about the fact or consider it that we're not really married until we get that marriage license signed and filed in a courtroom? The biblical model is very different, as Dr. Carlson even just said.
I want to bring this point up, or not bring this point up, but sort of like pause on this note, because this is something that I grew up in a culture where it was really, 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 really important that you wait before marriage to have sex. And, as Christians, we believe that. But that's what, there are certain Christian cultures that sort of really, really brought that to the forefront in their, like teen ministries and so forth. It's like
purity culture of the 90s.
Yeah, the purity culture.
Yeah.
I didn't quite grow up in the purity culture, but I read the books, and things like that. And I do remember my friend got married, and this was this was in 2010, I believe. I had a friend who got married, and my other friend, who was his best man, and the three of us were pretty good friends. And I was in the wedding, and his dad was the one doing the service, right? He was the one marrying them. And this was in the state of Indiana. So I don't remember what the laws are in the state of Indiana or what they were in 2010. But when they were doing the rehearsal, they were saying something like they didn't actually go through with the vows saying like word for word, because there was this like sort of sacred thing about saying them word for word, because like, I don't know. I think there was this secret fear that like, well, we said it last night. So like the bride and groom are going to go sneak off and have sex or something. I don't know.
Oh my.
But I remember thinking, oh, okay, fine. They're just, being cautious or what. I don't know what the words are. And I'm just like, oh, interesting. And I was married at the time. I'm still married. I was already married. So I got married before. But like, it just was really interesting to me how Christians really are deceived, and that's why I'm bringing this up, into believing that this is what sort of seals the deal, that like God is endorsing you two going to bed now, because the state has signed it. Like if for some reason
it's this idea of being official about it.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't have Facebook back then to be Facebook official, so like maybe that will count now. I don't know. So I guess soon as you change your Facebook status.
Even in common law, there are establishments, and for what constitutes marriage. Over the course of years, cohabitation over the course of some X number of years, counts as common law marriage and stuff like that, and that confers, that confers certain kind of legal privileges, things like power of attorney, medical power of attorney, so on, and those are actually like. Again, that didn't need the state even to get that. And I don't think we really get into this, the common law components of all this. I can't remember. It might have come up in some of the Q&A, but it doesn't really matter. But it's like, it's interesting, like how even the legal record, and legal in the sense of like real law, like common law, not legislative action, but just common law developed over the course of decades, centuries, and whatnot, affirms all of this, that it doesn't need the state to make definitions. It just exists, and it kind of goes to Carlson's evolutionary point. For the most part, it's like all of this stuff arises naturally. Legislation be damned. I mean, it's like none of that matters. And that's what's so interesting about like trying to build it in, like whenever you then try to abrogate natural law and common law in this case, and try to build out a state or legal apparatus in the form of a government that then regulates this stuff, you end up, causing a lot of confusion. And it's just funny. And by the way, we should note here, and while we have a moment, that like this whole idea of like, well, let's appeal to your conservative minds here for a second. If you think, as a limited to zero, notice I said limited to zero government advocate, as of course I
think we should always limit it to zero.
Yeah, well, I have to.
That's not what you meant.
I'm sort of, surreptitiously outing myself as a more or less the, just the anarcho-capitalist that I am, of course. But the conservative mind, if you're like, okay, even if you're supposedly for like limited government and all that sort of thing, like you're the minarchist, if you will, like you say that the government shouldn't be regulating private institutions. That's what you say, right? Like it shouldn't regulate your business because it doesn't know how to run it. It shouldn't regulate your church because it darn well shouldn't. It shouldn't tell you how to run your family because that's not something it should be empowered to do. But in the case of marriage, well, that's where we need it. That's the cultural institution and that needs it.
There's a line in the show West Wing that says that conservatives want to make the government so small it can fit in your bedroom.
Yeah, right. I think that predates the West Wing, though. Technically,
well, maybe I don't know. That's where I first heard it. That's 20 years
PJ
ago.
Or rip PJ.
Yeah, that's probably Yeah, so the wow, we got a little off, not off topic, but we expanded upon that a little bit. But the point that I think it's important for people now to know that this whole idea that the state is deceiving us into believing that it has a proper role to play is just evidence in one particular instance where the state actually is overtaking an institutional role that it doesn't have the authority to take. And it's in one way it's like the crowd out effect, but I think the point is even more so that the state wants to be the end all be all of our existence.
Yeah.
And it's an entity that is such that it is competing with Christian institutions, Christian values. And I don't think you had all of that in mind when you said it deceives us, but because it certainly does. But I think an additional point that I would, kind of throw in there that there would be no time to say this in a debate, of course, is that the state is inherently at odds with the kingdom of God. And therefore because it is at odds, it tries to usurp the authority. And so you give the state authority to define marriage. Well, what's going to happen when you have the critical race theorists in? Yeah. Like when they say that you can't marry a black person because you're white, because you know what, that's colonialism or some.
Could you believe that actually came back into being? Holy moly! Right? I hadn't even thought about that. But
look at the Me Too movement.
Yeah.
Who are the Puritans now?
Yeah.
I mean, anyway. That's a little far afield, but again. Imagine the power of the legislation that you want to enact in the hands of your enemies. Yep. That's where we stand on this.
We'll see how long it takes me to get to the government that can give everything you want is also the government that can take it all away. I'm pretty sure I said that at some point. I just also throw out I had forgotten that I actually brought up anti-miscegenation laws in here.
That's good.
I was like, I just rubbed that one in a bit. Yeah.
Now, additionally, it is in the government's interest to control marriage. Oh, and why might it do this? What incentive does the government have to define, create, regulate, and control marriage? Well, when it wants to take power unto itself, it will be willing to sow the seeds that will break apart the family and cause people to become more dependent upon it. The more we cede over this sort of power to the government, the more dependent that we will become upon the government.
Stab that one.
The state also distorts the meaning of law to us in this regard. Yeah. Instead of letting marriage remain in the realm of private law, and instead of the state focusing on negative law and upon the enforcement of contracts, it corrupts reason. It corrupts our language by taking upon itself the power to define and to regulate. As some libertarian philosophers have said, the power to classify is the power to destroy. Yeah. Very much like the power to tax.
Can we pause there for a second? I have to throw that point comes from a friend of mine named Manuel. I won't say his last name just to protect him a little bit. but it's, the power to classify as power to destroy is a more recent, shall we say, libertarian innovation, and at least in terms of like the last 15 years. So hats off to Manuel for coming up with that phrase.
Awesome.
Pretty great.
Thank you.
And instead of focusing on the enforcement of contracts in private law, it creates dictates through legislative fiat that defines this is how you are to behave, this is how you are to arrange your contracts with each other. The solution then is to take away the power of the state, not give it additional power. Marriage spent 1,500 years or more outside of the realm of the state. There was no need for the state to do anything of it. It predates the nation state. We don't need that to occur.
You keep using the word the state, and he was using the word government.
Yeah, well, you know.
That's just, well, it's so important because it's like a clarifying way of thinking of like, you have this entity that is doing its thing, being its, going with its own agenda, like I described earlier. Whereas he seems to have bought into the idea that government is what we do together.
Well, yeah. I mean, granted, the resolution though did specify the use of the word government. I'm just being like, I'm narrowing it a little bit.
Well,
which,
sure.
So like, I'm caveating that a bit. So
yeah. No, I get that.
Yeah.
Now we don't have to rely on the state. Ultimately, as I've said, marriage predates the state, and it is a powerful institution in and of itself. We can, as the church, ultimately make the greatest difference in society by promoting healthy marriages and healthy families through biblical teaching and solid theology. And this is where I believe Dr. Carlson ultimately shines in his philosophy and in his presentation. The state just needs to stay out of the way and let culture thrive. And that brings the real power of influencing marriages back to the church and allows us to, in our means of serving others, influence the surrounding culture. We as Christians then ought to promote then the following. One is that we should promote freedom of association to pursue common interests. We should promote freedom to contract for mutual...
And published in a variety of...
Oh, shoot.
Whoops.
I clicked like right above the... Well, I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it. We might have to
search. Uh-oh.
But
well, while you're figuring...
Go ahead and make your point.
While figuring that out, like the whole deal about freedom of association and anti-miscegenation laws, that goes together, guys. I mean, like this is a really foundational thing. That the moment that you allow the government to begin defining what relationships are valid and which ones are not, like you're abrogating freedom of association from the beginning. And so if we believe that individuals have freedom of association, that is a foundational, tenet of civilization itself, then like you can't begin to cede over power to a government in order to regulate relationships like this. And yeah, you may get some people who do some weird stuff with their relationships. It's not the business of us to just figure out how to regulate all of that together. Like that's like, what's the point of that? You're far better off trying to just support the healthy things that you work, like healthy marriages, healthy churches, healthy families, rather than like trying to be the watchdog over the aberrant 1% or something like that. Anyway, let's see where we're at. Did you figure it out?
Well, we'll have to see. Hang on.
Very appealing to conservatives who want to make sure that the government gets as little money as state. There was no need for the state to do anything of it. It predates the nation state. We don't need that to occur.
Yeah, I think now we're a little behind, but that's all right.
Now we don't have to rely on the state. Ultimately, as I've said, marriage predates the state. And it is a powerful institution in and of itself.
Yeah.
We can, as the church, ultimately make the greatest difference in society by promoting healthy marriages and healthy families through biblical teaching and solid theology. And this is where I believe Dr. Carlson ultimately shines in his philosophy and his presentation.
Yeah.
The state
Look, you just complimented him twice in this episode.
Yeah, amazing. I'm such a nice guy.
Brings the real power of influencing marriages back to the church and allows us to, in our means of serving others, influence the surrounding culture. We as Christians then ought to promote then the following. One is that we should promote freedom of association to pursue common interests. We should promote the freedom to contract for mutual benefit.
Mm-hmm.
We should eliminate the special class citizens that marriage law has created. And we should extend those legal benefits to anyone who wishes to initiate contracts in a similar way. In so doing, we promote equality under the law. And if other people want, and in fact, this should be even very appealing to conservatives who want to make sure that the government gets as little money as possible. And we should ultimately promote independence of the church. We should not be burdened by the dictates of the state in how we as a church arrange how we deal with our own Christian marriages. Now, that's not to say that the church should be uninvolved with society at large. We can do a whole lot in that regard. We can promote work like that which Dr. Carlson does, and we can promote these fundamental freedoms that we all have. And finally, government should ultimately get out of marriage entirely. And we should remember that if we do get what we want here, that we might be sowing our own seeds of destruction. You might get the political power that you need now to do all the things that you want. But when the powers turn against you, it's probably going to come back at you with a vengeance. In the end, anything that is so important that you think the government should define, regulate, and control it is probably too important to let the government have any hand in it at all.
You know, you were speaking to people who would say who would want to say like we have this power to regulate, but like no, you don't. You just voted or gave authority or delegated some ability for other people in power in a way that is very hard to undo. You're giving them, and not even those particular people, maybe for an additional 6 years or 4 years or whatever the situation might be. Maybe Supreme Court justices might, for one generation, whatever. That's maximum. You don't have the power. You just gave it to a bunch of other people.
Well, and it's just, it comes down to this faulty idea. One of the myths of American governance, if you will, or the American state, American statism, is this kind of the we are the government sort of aspect to it.
Yeah.
Which frankly, is actually kind of, if I recall right, that's actually kind of Rousseauian. So mentioned by, Rousseau mentioned by Carlson earlier in excoriation. And like that idea is false. It is ideological camouflage that allows for the people who do have power to basically provide foils for what they want to do.
Yep.
Like, well, we're just doing it to ourselves here, or something that's garbage, guys. Like, don't ever believe it.
There's stronger words than garbage for this episode.
Yes, for sure. So
you have 5
minutes. Okay, so this is the 5-minute rebuttal.
It's never fair to have my own quotes thrown back at me. That's okay. Well, the libertarian solution that's been proposed here by Dr. Horn actually does seem very attractive. I wish it would succeed.
Aww. How
Alas,
sweet.
I don't believe it can or will. Not in the real world.
Yeah.
And I offer 3 reasons. 2 of a practical nature and 1 which might be called philosophical. First, even if you have private contracts, private marriage contracts, you're still going to need someone to enforce decisions when there are disputes. That's what courts and police power do.
No, that's what arbiters
Can
do.
American courts be expected and trusted and American police forces be expected and trusted to enforce a wide range of marital contracts? Just imagine.
Whoa, wait. Aren't we supposed to back the blue here? Wait, what's the...
No, man. That's a movement like a decade later.
Oh, right. Got it. Okay, yeah, my bad.
The cultural milieu is not strong with the blue at this time. I did not mean to rhyme.
Yeah.
Again.
Say that Roman Catholics sign up for contracts involving indissoluble unity unless a church official grants an annulment. Meanwhile, strict Lutherans will sign contracts which allows for divorce for reasons of adultery, although the guilty party may not remarry. For Muslims, men may have up to 4 wives. For Unitarian bisexuals, there will be a whole different set of rules, which I can't even imagine, and so on. What happens when someone claims that they've been converted?
That's a funny joke.
I'm no longer a Catholic. I'm not bound by my Catholic marriage vows. To me, it's simply inconceivable that our current court system, with its heavy commitment to individualized sexual rights, almost a core commitment at this point, that it could ever sort its way through these questions in any consistent and fair manner.
Definitely some culture war bias showing through there.
Imagine it happening. Practically, it won't.
But okay, pause right there. Like this, I know that I do not address this particular point because I just wasn't as astute at even analyzing arguments on the fly even 10 years ago like that. But like, just because you can't imagine it doesn't mean that it is inconceivable. I mean, like that's kind of
most of history couldn't imagine no slavery.
Yeah, I mean, there's any number of ways that you can kind of go with that. So it's not really fair, I think, as an argument. Like I know where he's getting at, but there actually are answers like that. I mean, if all your problem is that it's inconceivable right now to you, so you're saying, wait, I just need to provide you like one possible example of how it might work out. Would that convince you?
Yeah.
No, I mean, if it does, I mean, that should work, but that's not what he actually wants.
Yeah.
On some level, and that's often not the way these folks argue. And with as much respect as I would give to Dr. Carlson here, you know, even if I were to probably proffer like, well, there is a conceivable way, it'd be like, well, that's not enough. You know, you need to actually have it all fleshed out. It's like, well, but that's question begging as well, because likewise, what you're saying doesn't exist. Like I could just say, well, what you're asking for is inconceivable. And then what are you going to do? Like are you required to put out?
Right.
Is he required to put out the entirety of the apparatus right now? Like I don't think it's it would be unfair for me to require that.
I think he assumes that he has that. I think he probably assumes that he has it because it's simple. You just have the state enforce this thing.
Yeah, just have the state enforce the thing that exists already that isn't on the books or whatever. Yeah. I mean, it's the state. We'll handle it. Like, because we're the government and you're not, or something, I don't know. But no, it's not. In other words, it's not really a fair way of arguing. So anyway, that's just notable. I know that I'm not going to.
Definitely.
I'll actually say this here when we get done with the 5 minutes. I do remember very distinctly feeling like that, like, whoa, what am I about to do here? And I remember feeling like that the space between him ending and me starting felt like a lifetime. And I'm fairly sure that it wasn't. We'll find out.
Be possible to maintain any limits on who might marry whom. Certainly the limits of only 2 persons would not stand, for it is clearly a residue of Christian bigotry to insist on that. So group marriages of a startling variety would surely follow. What about children? Only a few weeks ago, the American Psychological Association attempted to reclassify pedophilia as a sexual orientation, not a sexual disorder. Now, they backtracked somewhat. There was still enough of an outcry against that, but it's clear where they're headed. And it's also clear that American courts have been unusually responsive to changes in definitions made by the APA. What will this mean? Well, in the not too distant future, just count this as a prediction. Children who have reached the age of reason, which is usually understood to be the age of 6 or 7, also will be gaining a right to marry without interference by their parents.
That's quite a bait and switch
Third,
there, by the way.
This compromise, so to speak, will...
So explain what he's doing there. Like, that's just I got a little bit of shock value of him. Like, my reaction was probably what he wanted to have, which was, wait, 6 and 7-year-olds are going to be allowed to marry if we go down this destructive path of not having the state? Like, what? Yeah, what's he doing there? What's his rhetoric?
I think it's a bait and switch, because it's essentially that imagine that the consequence of what you're saying, this is it, as though that's the inevitable thing. Where and it's, I mean, it's a form of argumentation where he's trying to demonstrate, well, here are what the consequences are, but it's on some level, it's like almost the South Park way of doing arguments, where it's like, well, do X, step 1, buy this underwear or whatever, and step 2, question mark, and then step 3, profit. Except it's this other way of like, well, step 1, define, allow marriage to go into the to exit the state. Question mark. Step 3, pedophilia, or I don't think that's a valid way of realistically, like, it requires many more steps to demonstrate.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, like, he said that the whoever, I forget who was referring to, has backtracked people who have thought the pedophilia is an orientation. That has not receded entirely, and that is something that some people do propose. And so, on one hand, he is sort of right, but I don't hear anybody advocating that.
But that's not the consequence of the government getting out of marriage. It's already happening, guys. I mean, so
you're right. Yep.
Come on, like, do the Biden? Come on, man. I don't know, whatever. But
I did that on another podcast too many times, and then I was just like, okay, I got to stop saying that.
This arrangement might be a better way to put it. We'll quickly face a clash of rival philosophies, or better put, anthropologies, that have huge policy consequences. Okay, Christians understand human sexuality in a distinct way. You are born either male or female, and you fulfill and complete your sexual identity by finding someone of the opposite sex with whom you are compatible and whom you marry. In a healthy Christian order, all the signals sent to the young by parents, extended family members, church, and culture encourage this quest, which is truly and uniquely consummated in heterosexual marriage. However, the anthropology found in the LBGT community is very different. These folks hold that there are numerous sexual identities: lesbian, bisexual, gay, transsexual, along with heterosexual, and that young persons, indeed children, must conduct an individual quest to find out which of these orientations is right for them. This quest by children and young people is a fundamental human right in their worldview. Any attempt by parents, preachers, or others to overtly favor heterosexuality or to guide children toward traditional marriage becomes a violation of children's rights, an aspect of what is now being called heterosexism, a practice said to be wrong and evil as racism. These two are simply incompatible. My time is up.
Mr. Horn, you have 6 minutes.
Okay. First off, I will begin with remarks that Dr. Carlson made earlier regarding, for instance, the Genesis 1 definition. Ultimately, in a sense, he's supporting my point that marriage does predate all governments and all other judicial representations. Marriage has happened in human society potentially millions of years before any of this thing that we call the nation state showed up. So, in a sense, it begs the question: why government is necessary in the first place? He said that marriage is maintained through procreation. Absolutely. This is absolutely true. And it's something that cannot be done by homosexuals. That's absolutely true. So ultimately, even on an evolutionary basis, homosexuality is a losing battle. marriage is ultimately going to prevail, and it's not going to matter what they want to call it at any future date. Our responsibility as Christians, however, is to oppose the way that they want to present it to you in today's culture. Just as Dr. Carlson said, we are to oppose this heterosexism?
Heterosexism.
Yeah. How bizarre. But we don't have to agree with those definitions. We can come back and argue against them. And I would say we have a much better chance of being successful at doing so if we do not do so using the force of the state behind us.
Amen.
Dr. Carlson mentioned all sorts of scenarios where tyrannical governments put forward various legal challenges to traditional marriage. And I would say those are really good examples for why you don't want to put marriage in the jurisdiction of the state. It supplants common law, it supplants private law, it supplants contractual law, and it creates instead contracts with the public power, as opposed to understanding that Christian marriage is a covenant between man and woman and is part of the jurisdiction of the church. It's interesting that he even cited the French philosopher who who even suggested that the state is interested in fertility for production of children for war. Is that the way that we want a state to look at how we arrange our families? No. As Christians,
this is a he went there argument.
Wham!
I wonder how that sits with that sort of audience, because my guess is that sort of audience is not necessarily, at least back in 2013, anti-war. They were like, well, war is a necessary tool, blah, blah, blah. So like that may not have had I wonder if it had the intended effect on the listener. I hope it does now, for sure.
I don't know. What I will say, I'm 100% certain the video will not show this at the end, but it is funny to note that at the end of this, and this is like after all the Q&A and whatnot, which I know we're not gonna go through that tonight, and I may do some commentary on the Q&A at a later date. But suffice to say that after the debate was over, I got a flood of people, and we were conversing on topics for yet like another hour and a half. And I was explaining libertarian ideas and talking more about this stuff and expanding upon stuff that we had discussed and so on. And whereas Dr. Mitchell and Dr. Carlson, I'm pretty sure had a couple people go up to them, and they're but not, they were not swarmed. It was actually kind of reminiscent of the what was it, the Hayek Keynes rap battle. That's a little bit, perhaps a bit slightly egotistical to refer to that, although we did recently have the originator of John Papola on our main podcast. But that was, well, anyway.
Let's keep hearing what you have to say.
Yeah.
What you had to, yeah.
We should not be promoting war. We are men and women of peace. There is no reason to partner with the state who has interests like that.
Yeah.
Nice turn of phrase there, partner with the state.
We're not about production of citizens who will serve the state. We're about production of citizens in the kingdom of God.
Bam!
And in that way, we don't need to depend upon the state for these sorts of things. He mentioned also contractual.
You could have said something like, if the state defines marriage, then basically it puts us in service of procreating for war.
I mean, that would have been good.
I mean, you kind of said that, but I mean, yeah.
No, but at least that's what the Rousseauians would even kind of were going at back in the day.
We're procreating little militants.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Enforcement. Now, this is an interesting subject that kind of goes beyond the scope of our conversation today a little bit, but there are plenty of ways in which contracts can be enforced by third parties and can be agreed upon beforehand without the use of a state at all.
Oh, I did go there.
And in fact, we could cite the multitude of instances, even in today's modern American society, where arbitration is used much more often between both individuals and businesses to solve differences than traditional courts these days, because courts are completely ineffective and out of control. I would argue.
I don't think people realize how frequent our lives are arbitrated by other non-legal entities. Like, anarchy exists pretty smoothly. Like, I do realize that, like, in the Nozikian sort of way, there is this state that's sort of the backdrop of, like, if for some reason we had to sue Chase Manhattan Bank, we could. And it would be in the, it could eventually go to the Supreme Court or something like that. But, like, most of our lives is pretty much outside the state.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, that's sort of true. And even though the divorce courts are actually like a big deal, like that's actually where, I mean, a lot of courts do get really caught up in just divorce court. Like that's, because there's a lot of divorces, which sucks. I mean, but that's the American milieu that we live in as well. So, take it
We're all
it
just
for what it
selfish
is.
Individuals.
But it's just funny. Because we were talking earlier. I was like, I wasn't sure if I got, I sort of indicated I felt like that was a disingenuous way of arguing there, and I didn't quite call him on exactly that point, but I did answer it. So,
yay!
Great job, past Norm. You did pretty good there.
I think I have a new title for this episode.
In fact, it is better to avoid courts entirely, as in fact Jesus kind of warned us to do at times, rather than allow for marriage to go into the court of law. Now, he says, maybe I would work in an ideal world, and he can't imagine the way it would work. But in reality, actually, it has worked before. Predating the nation state, how in the world did ancient Israel even deal with marital covenants before the time of the kings? Did it have some sort of state-run court? No, it used a private law system under which to deal with differences. Do I have any time left?
Sick! I can't believe I did that.
1 minute and 20 seconds. Okay.
I just paused there. I just that literally. That was like I smashed it right there. I mean, that was the answer. Like, you can't imagine it, but you're very
own Bible.
Your Bible says it worked. Wow, that's even. Dang, I was on point. I guarantee you, I did not prepare that point, because this is rebuttal section. So nice. Dang,
the final thing that he's mentioned, definitions of deviance. Again, this is an issue that comes to, does the government have the right to classify these sorts of things at all? When it takes to itself the power to define law like this, it enters into the realm of positive law, rather than dealing with violations of rights themselves. Yeah. Because if it can define what pedophilia is, then it gets to define that you weren't, dealt with by a pedophile, I suppose. But in the
not my strongest point.
In the common law and in private law,
it's an awkward point to make.
The way that we have looked at negative law throughout history, we deal with this in terms of violation of rights, not by state definitions.
Yeah, so that's what that kind of recovered it a little bit, but not my best point.
1 minute to bring it all together.
1 minute.
There's a lot I could say in response.
Like a minute.
I think what I'm just going to do, though, is just kind of conclude the point.
Gene Epstein would have given you more time
for about these two human anthropologies that are in conflict today, right now, here in the real world of the United States of America, 2013.
And I don't dispute that.
Not ancient Israel. And they are incompatible. If the LGBTQ argument prevails, parents and religious communities will not be allowed to interfere with their children's sexual quest. That's clearly stated goal. And I think you can see where that would lead relative to issues such as education and child custody. This is why Robert George, one of our nation's leading authorities on religious liberty, now tells religious leaders that there will be no successful grand compromise on the marriage question, not in our time. This grand compromise being, we accept same-sex marriage, you let us run our own affairs, hold on to our understandings of sexuality, marriage, and human purpose within our own communities. It will not happen. Instead, for reasons like the one I described a little earlier, Dr. George says that if you lose on the marriage issue, you will also lose on religious liberty.
think those are somewhat orthogonal, but I understand where he wants to go with that, but it's not entirely fair. Yeah.
I don't know if I agree with that at all. Like he's making this issue the penultimate issue of like religious liberty, like that. Yeah. Like if we lose them, I don't know.
Yeah, you haven't made
You're
a
right.
case.
They're orthogonal, and it's almost like it wasn't even part of his case in the whole time. It was more like if he would have started off with, religious freedom is at risk, and this is, sort of the touchstone of that.
Yeah.
Then I could sort of understand that point, but it's like he ends with religious liberty. Like maybe he's trying to, the charitable way is like he's trying to appeal to someone like you who is like, well, but it's a religious liberty is really, really important. That kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a very charitable way of addressing, and maybe that's exactly what he was intending, and that's fair.
Yeah,
I mean, we could give him that, and
yeah,
but is that a logical progression of where we're at? And I don't think that he's made a case that's going to be that's what would happen, and I don't think that it is realistically what would follow.
And in 11 years since, we've seen a concurrent fading of religious liberty as well as, I mean, this issue, at least governmentally, has been settled. I hate saying the word settled, but we understand what I mean by that. This issue has
been
passed
legislated on.
This issue has passed the national conversation. Okay.
Sure.
So in some ways, this isn't, I wouldn't say an antiquated discussion, but it's a discussion of the role of the state on one particular issue that's really, really important. We're past that. And
well, technically this debate even happened post those points as well. I mean, really. So
well, but we're not debating this anymore as a national conversation. It's not the issue that conservatives are bringing up. I mean, they might be begrudging or grudgingly complain about it, but but we haven't seen religious liberty fade because of this.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there's more time for us to, maybe in 20 years, Norm, you and I will be doing, the 4,500 episode of, LCI, and we're admitting that, Allan Carlson was right about this one point, 36 years ago. Anyway, I'm gonna let you get to your final rebuttal.
Did I get one? I'm not sure.
Right,
I think
that's
he had
gotten us
final
off
word.
to an excellent start.
Yeah.
And now we're going to turn to the part of our program where you all get to ask.
This is where they go to the Q&A.
Our
Wait, so you didn't get a 1 minute rebuttal, or
no?
I
had 6 minutes.
Oh, okay. I was like waiting for your 1 minute, just random, just like rapid fire zingers to finish this out.
Yeah,
like that was really what I was like hoping for.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are your concluding thoughts here?
I mean, I think that I'm surprised going through this again and going like, oh, actually, like that. I think I did pretty well overall. And it wasn't exactly as I remembered it, that's for sure. But your memories fade, and these more permanent records are.
Well, your answers and your responses were really solid. I mean, I think in some ways you'd probably, 80+% of the outline you'd probably say again, right?
I think at least 80%. I mean, I feel like there's probably some additional things I would have wanted to go at, and just things that you don't think about in the heat of the moment, and where you might think about it later.
Is there anything that you have learned, or even if it's just rhetoric, but anything you've learned in the 11 years since, now that you're a better libertarian?
Well, I think it's more like 9 years since, as opposed to the other way around. But
oh yeah, I keep saying 11 years, and I don't know why it's not 2024, Doug.
Yeah. I think that even I probably would say that I underestimated some of the things that Allan did talk about with regards to the pressing concerns about the upcoming cultural situations regarding transgenderism in particular and whatnot. I think the surprising thing, and maybe it's just maybe it's just the way that I my own cultural experience and background would not have led me to believe that the public schools were going to be the huge vector of intrusion in this regard with respect to gender identity issues and whatnot. Like I guess I just didn't think about it that way. It's interesting that, when we think about what he said 9 years ago and where we are now, to like, there are some legitimate concerns there, but it's not because the government didn't make this definition more solid. It is because of irresponsibility on our part, that being the church, to direct culture in solid and healthy ways. So like we don't have a lot to blame other than ourselves in this regard. Because when you cede over power for the education of your children to the public schools and the state and this, like, what else are you going to get? So like you're not helping yourself by trying to increase the power of the government in just whatever direction you feel like you want at the time. Like within another couple of years, the conservatives got what they wanted. They got 4 years of their conservative icon, at the helm, along with a conservative Congress for 2 years. So like, it's not as though they didn't have their shot. So it's not as though that things didn't go their way. I mean, that is the reality here. So so I don't think that that Dr. Carlson ultimately made the stronger case. I mean, I sort of like, because I mean, I am me. I mean, even 9 years hence. So but nonetheless, like I think that like he had some important things to say, and he makes some great points. I think that like I was genuinely intrigued by Dr. Carlson's writings back then, even on the part of like the state of the court system, no fault divorces, which I thought his writings on that were fascinating. As I didn't get into that more than a few seconds, but like it was legit interesting stuff to read what he had to say. But it doesn't make the case that you need to increase the power of the state and that you need to initiate aggression against other people in order to win this culture war. Like that's not the way this works.
Yeah.
So I wish that if I were to, kind of change up some of the language, I would have focused more on the inherent aggression necessary in order to carry out this culture war, and kind of note that the Christian way of doing things is not to play that game. Yeah. And I kind of allude to that in various capacities, but I think that's the main way I would have changed it up a bit.
Nice. Well, this has been a fun exercise in, I don't know, it's just like reminiscing. Because I remember after this debate, you sent this to me, and this was great that it was recorded. I think I might have even been able to tap into it live while it was live streaming, and then I had to like watch the recording later. So I'm glad you found this in the the annals of your archival drives on your computer or wherever it was. That we were able to kind of use this. Yeah. So anyway, well, thanks for. I feel like I'm talking to you like you're a guest. Duh. But like, thanks for joining me, Norm.
Oh, you're welcome, Doug. It's a pleasure to be here. And do make sure, like, if you're listening to this, go and like watch it. It's fun.
Yeah, at the very least, you'll get to see Norman's reactions to himself. Which actually, and I don't mean that. I mean that somewhat humorously, but there's actual visual reaction to some of the things being said that you will obviously it would have been in silence as you're listening. So yeah. Anyway, thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next time.